Welcome to Mindful Management, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you're joining us for today's episode of Mindful Management. Delighted today to welcome Mara Kamat, a visionary HR leader and the founder of On The MRK Consulting. With a robust background in human resources at dynamic companies like Great Lakes Cheese and Philips Healthcare, Mara excels in sculpting effective HR strategies and leading transformative leadership programs. Her expertise is rooted in empowering organizations to foster healthy, productive workplace environments through innovative practices. A distinguished speaker and coach, Mara is committed to promoting leadership excellence and well-being in the workplace, continually enriching her approach with insights from her academic pursuits, including Harvard Business School's Authentic Leadership Development Program. Mara, we're delighted to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and share any knowledge that can help people as they navigate their careers and workplaces.
We love that. And it's kind of that I'm sort of always interested in people's stories, right? Especially because I think on this podcast, the work that people are doing isn't found any curriculum. And you've had some significant roles across high growth environments. And I'm just wondering if you can share maybe how some of your experience have shaped your approach to the way you see building resilient teams currently in the workforce.
Yes, I would say there are many different phases in my career. I've had the opportunity to lead large transformations. And in any transformation or crisis, I always look at it and step back and try to find the opportunities. The pandemic taught us a lot about being nimble and having to flex, and our economy, whether it be with challenges in supply chains or tariffs or even imports and exports, all of those things cause us to have to kind of step back and think about what we're doing differently. And so as humans, we can make a choice. We can make a choice to worry, to go into crisis mode, or we can make a choice to say, we're going to face these challenges. How do we pivot and how do we find the opportunities in these challenges? And I would say that mindset has served me well throughout my entire career. So at Philips Healthcare, we were leading a large transformation in that we were redefining our quality management system. We actually had to shut the business down for a period of time. And we did that voluntarily. And then we rebuilt and redefined our quality management system. And we had to teach all of our employees what that meant, what those behaviors entailed, how they had to make different decisions each and every day in their work, how our engineers had to use different processes and how they designed our technology. I look at the pandemic and I was working in the food space. Our employees were working 100% of the time and we needed to keep them safe. We needed to think differently to make sure we could continue to sustain our business. And now in my consulting practice, I'm working with a number of clients and the current environment is complex and challenging and they have to pivot. And so what I've worked with a lot of leadership teams on over the last 12 months is how do you look at each of these opportunities? And instead of going into this like crisis mindset, how do you teach your teams to build a level of resilience that they go into problem solving? And how do we support each other collaboratively so we don't have people upset or worried or all over the place, but we have people working together to kind of think through each of the challenges, even if that challenge doesn't reside in engineering or finance or HR, that we're all working as a cross-functional team on each other's challenges to find those opportunities for the business in these moments of crisis.
Yeah, there's uncertainty is constant. Peace. And we used to think maybe chaos would pop up and we'll just deal with it and push through. Now it seems like we're living in an environment where it is this constant piece, and we know that just neurobiologically that change gives us anxiety. Like, that is the normal human response. There's nothing wrong with us, because the brain is unsafe when there's change. And so when there's constant change, we're gonna see people responding, as you said, right? I would say their survival brain, that fight, flight, freeze, appease place, right? And thus not having access to executive functioning. We can't think clearly, we can't, think about what will these issues mean in the future. We don't have a lot of creativity. The piece that interests me from what you're saying, and again, just kind of offering that up in different language, is then the cross collaboration is that we can't just see ourselves as HR or engineering or admin or whatever department we happen to be in. Because sometimes when you're in the department, you can't even see the problem or the solution, right? And it's not just someone outside is like, "What are you doing over here? It's causing us pain. What is happening with your team?" And so I'm just wondering about that relationship piece and how you're helping folks to bridge those relationships and not see themselves as isolated departments.
I think there's a lot of different activities and interventions I would say that you can take leadership teams through. I think the most important thing is making sure leadership teams have the relationships with each other where they're building trust to be and mechanisms to be able to like step back and take those moments to look at the problems more broadly. So it's easy for a CEO to say, finance, we now have all of these increases in commodities and tariff prices, go figure it out. But it's a little bit more challenging for a leadership team to sit in a room together and say, okay, here is our business challenge. It affects all of us. And how do we solve this together? And how do we make time to solve that together? Because everybody's going from meeting to meeting to meeting. And so I think what I would encourage companies to do is say, what are those mechanisms that we're building in to make sure we're allocating time all together to solve problems and not just putting it on this is one function's problem, but this is our team's problem. And given that it's our team's problem, let's sit in a room together and really dedicate time to figure out how we're going to solve this. And then one of the things I've seen, I didn't expect this, but I've experienced this is companies inviting consultants in, the value of that too is that they're not entrenched in the day to day and they can see the bigger picture and they're not involved in the political dynamics that might be happening across individuals or functions, that tension that just inherently exists. And so the value that I've seen that I can bring is just this clear headed picture where I'm not emotionally involved and I can kind of call people out in ways that aren't so intimidating or aggressive or uncomfortable to get them to think differently and to have a different conversation than they might have.
Those curious questions, right? Because it's like because you don't know. I mean, I say this as my role as a consultant all the time. Like, I have to ask questions because I really don't know the answer. And in asking those questions, you sometimes get to those tensions unintentionally and sometimes intentionally because you sense something's going on, even though you don't know exactly what it is. Something in there that you said was time, Mara, and I just want to visit that one because I'm sure you hear this a lot, which is we don't have time to all come together. We don't have time to sit in this room and process. I know what I say in those situations, but I'd love to hear kind of your version of why it matters to slow down perhaps, but also how do you combat everyone's feeling that there's just not enough time to do these things that you're talking about?
There's so many strategies that I employ on this, and it's based on who's in the room and what the conversation is. Sometimes I'm as aggressive as to say, like, all right, well, if you're not going to make time, then you're not really serious about solving this problem or solving this issue. So sometimes I take that strategy. But then there's other times where I'm like, these people are clearly stressed out. they need a partner to help figure out how they can break things down and break their cycle to really solve this. I do this for companies, but I do this for myself. And I think it's an important skill to learn when you're recognizing that you in yourself or that you in your team don't have enough time to be spending the time on what really matters. And so, how do you interrupt your behavior patterns to give yourself time to think? And I'll be really transparent and say that sometimes organizations don't allow you to do this. And so, in their culture and their way of being and the pace. And so, you have to figure out, how do I do this for myself? Otherwise, it leads to burnout, right? And I've experienced burnout in my career. And so, a great example of this personally is I had a lot of client things that were happening. I noticed myself working more like 60 to 70-hour weeks. I also have two children. I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old. And was getting caught up in that like week after week for like 8 weeks. And I stepped back and I was like, I don't want to live like this. I had already set that boundary for myself. And so, how do I reset? And I knew I was coming up on a vacation that was going to interrupt my cycle and that was going to enable me to reset. And it was 1 week. I disconnected. I stayed committed to disconnecting. And that was the reset that I needed to then spend a day when I came back to reestablish what were my norms going to be. How many hours was I going to work? How did I need to adjust expectation of clients given that? And where was I going to spend my time that was most value added? And what were some of those other things that I was going to delegate or get rid of? And so,
I just appreciate that so much because I think we we you and I also get into this cycle of like, we gotta just keep going, which naturally feeds itself to keep you trapped in the cycle. And it's kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask you because at Philips, you had this ability to like shut down to then think about how to move forward. Now, for most companies, that's not on the cards, right? It's like we're trying to change a culture or we're trying to solve a problem or we're trying to do this thing. And at the same time, we gotta keep making the cheese, right? We gotta keep doing the thing that we do here. And so, how do we find the balance there when we wanna change? How do we bridge that? Because I see that for myself personally, sometimes that vacation isn't on the books. Like, and you're trapped in that place, and then it feels like the vacation can never get on the books, right? And so, do you have any tips or ways or thoughts on bridging those 2 places when you can't just shut down for the reset, but you gotta kind of continue doing it and do this other thing at the same time?
I would say, so although Phillips felt like a shutdown, it really wasn't because we only shut down the United States and we were still operating in all the other countries. So I'm not sure in any job I've really been able to like, or company I've ever been really able to like shut it down. It's always been your coming up with the new ideas while you're continuously building or growing or fixing or integrating or acquiring or transforming. So I think that's the reality of the world that we live in. But then to get more specific to your question around like what are some tips or ways to interrupt that cycle? I think it comes back to like what are those personal boundaries that you're making a choice to set? And then like sticking to those personal boundaries. So, mine was I was able to have that time off and take that vacation recently. But in other points in my career, I haven't been able to do that. And honestly, in some leadership positions, my vacations are completely interrupted by business crises that are happening, and I don't really get that time off. And so, one of those things I committed to for myself and I aligned with my family, with my husband, with my kids is like every Sunday, I am going to take 2 hours to think about, to just have me time. And I can use that time for life. I can use it for work. I can use it for just kind of like stepping back to think about what's important to me. And candidly, I've had business coaches over the course of my career, and I've had therapists as well. And sharing those boundaries with people that are close to you, whether it be a life coach, a business coach, a therapist, a husband, a best friend, a sister. So you have an accountability partner, I think is really important. But then also taking the time to set around like, what are my boundaries going to be for this quarter, for this 6 months, for this year? I usually do it on a yearly time frame. And something I love to do is create a vision board every year. And now I do this activity with my kids. And it's all around like, what do I hope to achieve in this year? What gives me joy? What brings me happiness? And it's this one page kind of reflection of that. And what I notice is if work's not on there in any way, shape, or form, maybe that's a problem, right? Like, ask yourself, are you doing the right work that you're meant to do that gives you energy and passion? Or are you showing up to do a job every day? Or is there an element of that that's reflected on that vision board? And then, secondarily, how do you make space to do the things that bring you happiness and joy? Because if you're not doing those, you can't find that level of like engagement, achievement, and happiness in the work that you do and the life that you live. And so I like to step back and find that intersection. And finding that intersection in the midst of life is not always easy between work and parenting, community obligations, board work that you might do. You can get lost in it. And so for me, it's making that time every week to kind of reset and say, where am I at? And then when I see that I'm getting bad or I'm not setting those boundaries or I'm not listening to those boundaries, what interruption do I need to put in place to change that behavior? And who are my accountability partners or support systems to support me in that and remind me of that?
So powerful because for me, this is talking about that inside out piece, right? So we can have what's going on outside of us, all the things, but first getting ourselves. And I just love that the bridge really is like once you set your own vision, how do you bring that? And then as a team, and I say this even if you work in a small department or there's 5 of you or there's 50 of you, now, what are our boundaries as a group? Because I think that's the next big piece. Like, do we agree that just because I send you an email at 11 o'clock at night doesn't mean you have to respond to like, I'm not expecting a response. Like, have we even talked about what are everyone's boundaries and what does that look like? And I bring that up because this came about for me a long time ago is like, I work with a fully remote team who works across time zones. Like, you can't work the days, like, right from I'm on the East Coast, but I have staff on Pacific Coast time, and so it's very early for them mostly when I'm sending emails, and so we just adopted this thing in our signature line that says, "Respond on your own time," like, my working hours might not be yours. It's amazing to me the number of people who say, "I love that you have this in your email line." Like, we've just put it as part of our tag, like, "Hey." And mostly because like, sometimes I'm on site with clients, so I'm not responding to an email until late after business hours, right? Like, it's all of these weird times. And so it's just having that boundary of like, I don't expect you to respond to me just because I'm responding to you right now. And so I think it's that taking, like you say, your vision board, your boundaries, whatever that reflection is, doing your own work, knowing where you are, and then can you create a space so your team can help you? So, because when you have it in both places, that's 80% of it, can I say?
I mean, and to comment on that too, what you're doing is creating mutual respect, right? You are mutually respecting them and they are respecting you. And that goes such a far way in supporting the team and improving everybody's engagement and productivity and attitude because nobody feels this pressure of like, hey, I need to respond to Mara or Shen because they've sent a note. It's creating a boundary of mutual respect that says we work different time zones, we work different schedules, respond when you can respond. And we don't expect that immediate get back to me within an hour. And I think that's beautiful because you created that separation and that definition of mutual respect across your team so people can engage in the way that makes sense for them and is also empowering for them.
Yeah. So, Mara, what are common signs I think everyone can see these, no matter who you're working with, what industry you're working in, that perhaps a workplace is lacking sufficient boundaries or respect, safety. I kind of all of these you can kind of lump together. I think they cross-pollinate each other perhaps. And can you just maybe talk about the common signs you see, and then what's the effect on well-being and probably for leaders listening, productivity?
Yes. When you see people on your team responding at like all hours of the night. So I'm like, if it's after 10 o'clock and it's there an Eastern time zone, let's say, that's a problem. Another thing I think is like when I see tension in relationships across the team, there's like clearly not a mutual respect. People are, if I see anger kind of pop up outside of, um, you know, what's appropriate, maybe that's a better way to say it, then I kinda step back, I'm like, "Why are they so angry? What is happening there? What does the relationship look like? Why does that tension exist?" And, to me, those are some of the signs that I'm looking for. Also, if you see that one person might be more overloaded or is taking on more than another, and as a leader, you need to step back and see that for your team. We all have different capabilities on our team, but it's up to us as leaders to kind of step back and say, do I have the right capabilities on my team? Is it balanced? And have I balanced my workload across the team? Because sometimes I see that leaders always want to give it to the same people because they know they can depend on them. They know the level of output that they're going to get. And what that ultimately leads to with that person is burnout and also animosity across other team members that they're viewed as the favorite potentially. And so these are some of the things that I look for. I think from a productivity standpoint, people's productivity and engagement starts to be reduced when they're one, overloaded, or two, there's inherent tension across the team, or animosity across the team, or just this general feeling of burnout and exhaustion. And so I was always proactive to kind of look across my team every quarter and plan out, when is everybody taking vacation? What does this look like? How do we support each other in this vacation? And one of the boundaries that I kept, that I would say the leaders that I worked for even peers sometimes did not do a good job of respecting, but I was really insistent with it on my team, was when you are on vacation, you are on vacation. When you are out for a day or you have something for your child where you're going to be gone for 2 hours, you are out. You are not reaching out to them. You are not bothering them. You respect that boundary and you let those people be out and take their time to do what they need to do, because we're all adults, my friends, and we're all humans.
Yeah. It's a such a but that key, we're all adults, I think gets to a really key point of this work, which is, d have you hired the right people for your team? Right? And moving from that management, I have to manage my team, which for me is always I gotta micromanage and task them and make sure all these tasks are getting done, to I have to lead my team, which is I trust my people can do what they need to do, and they will take away what they need to take away, and they will find the balance themselves. And I think that piece is for a lot of leaders looking internally of like, do you have the right people on your team? Do you trust your people? And equally, do they trust you? You know, we talked about this on another podcast about that two-way street of trust. Do I trust them? Do they trust me? Do I trust myself that I've made the right decision?
I had somebody that works on my team, recently say to me, so she worked for me for like 5 years, and, I haven't ta I you know, her and I stay connected, but she's not working for me right now, and she said to me something that I found to be so interesting. She goes, "Mara, working for you, you rebuilt me. I was working for somebody before that just, like, sucked the spirit out of me, made me feel worthless, and you rebuilt me and made me feel confident in myself and to know the work that I do is great." And that always kind of, like, stuck with me. It has nothing to do with, like, me doing that and everything to do with, like, telling leaders, what kind of leader are you? Are you a leader that is, like, empowering, rebuilding, teaching, supporting, Or are you somebody that is tearing somebody down to a point where they lose that confidence? And I would tell you, this individual is so incredibly talented. She was one of the most talented people I've ever worked with and continue to work with. But she needed to rebuild that confidence and that perspective in herself of like, I do great work. I am really smart. I can contribute meaningfully. And she needed somebody to help her do that. And so, getting back to your point of trust, it's like, how does your team trust you? And given that trust, how do you treat them? And how does that impact their ability to contribute on your team, to be productive for your business, and to deliver the results at the level that you need them?
Yeah. Mara, before we kind of get to quick fire and those, I'm wondering what you see kind of coming. Especially I'm thinking about collaboration because I think in the next decade, that's the key to everything as we move forward is cross collaboration, and not just in your company, by the way, but with other companies and the way we partner and do things. What emerging trends and insights can you share, maybe specifically from HR, but that you think are going to be critical and I'm looking at the 5 to 10 years. What do you see coming down, as an emerging trend, do you think?
Yeah, I think that you're gonna need to have specialists on your team, right? But at the same time, those specialists are gonna need to possess qualities that enable them to solve problems more broadly, and enable them to collaborate more broadly and be beyond just their function. I even look at it in the context of my kids, and I'm like, what skills are they learning at school right now? What are they challenged with? And one of the things I really enjoy watching my older daughter do right now are her speech and debate discussions. And the conversation that we have all the time is, how do you ensure that you have civil discourse across whatever you're doing? And that seems really basic, but where I see longer term and in general, where I see teams most effective are the ones that are able to really get along, to value each other's perspectives, to listen, not the ones that are like fighting and have destructive conflict because they're so set on their specific functions, ways, or their personal opinions of to solve the problem. So for me, while this seems really basic, I think people having the ability to collaborate and influence cross-functionally, to listen to the subject matter experts when they're bringing it in and figuring out, how do I integrate all these pieces together? And then the piece that we didn't talk about is, how do I integrate technology into this, right? So whether it be AI, ChatGPT, what are those how do I seamlessly kind of integrate and adopt the productivity hacks that will give me what I need to then be able to go use my subject matter expertise and execute on whatever problem I have in front of me. So I'm not a believer that like AI is going to replace everybody, but I am a believer that there are some productivity hacks that can be used and integrated into our daily practices. We haven't figured out exactly what that looks like yet and how we use that to support our subject matter expertise and our abilities to work cross functionally.
Yeah, I sort of love that you brought up your kids in that question. It reminds me of a conversation I had when with my I have an adult daughter now, but when my daughter was in elementary school with an educator who said, "The problem with education will always remain that we're trying to train kids for jobs that don't exist yet," right? So how do you give skills? And at the time, I thought this is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard, but as I've been in my own career and thought about that, it always comes up as, like, some of the best advice I've ever received is that we have children, but the jobs that they'll be doing actually don't exist while we're in the process of educating them, right? So, it's a little bit of this guesswork of, yeah, do they need civil discourse? Do they need like, we don't know. We're trying to kind of predict what the job market will look like for kids who are currently, 6, 7, and 8, right? We don't know what jobs they'll be doing by the time they're 25. So it's an interesting piece. So thinking back, Mara, over kind of your extensive career, all the different things, maybe personally and professionally, what advice would you give to others who are trying to have, I'll just say, a more happy team, a more a fulfilling work culture balance? What's one thing if someone is really struggling, maybe their team is just in okay shape even, but they know it's not good or great. What's one thing that you piece of advice you would give them to ratchet it to a new, better place?
I think too often as humans and leaders, we're too hard on ourselves in a way. And so, number one, I would adopt a practice every week that says, what did I achieve this week? What were my wins? But I think the first part of answering your question is like, let's make sure that we believe in ourselves and that we know we are doing good and we are moving ourselves forward in the organization. Because sometimes I was always focused on what I wasn't doing versus the positive impact I was having. And so, that practice enables you to do that, but you got to do it every single week. And maybe it's Monday or maybe it's Friday. The second piece is I used to have a sticky note on my computer that had a message for me. And so step back and think about like, what message do you need to see in front of your face every week to continue to reset? And so for me, it was like, take a breath and recognize one positive thing that you've achieved this week, or you're not going to fix the world, know that you're making an impact in what you're doing right now. And so, what's your like one sticky note that you need to see every day to kind of reset you? And then, as a team, something like just practically I have found impactful is whether your organization has a talent assessment process or not, it doesn't matter. Take some time, carve it out, and do a talent assessment for every single person on your team and how you see them. And it's not just here's what they're contributing from a result standpoint, it's also and how does that personality fit on your team and how does that fit into the culture? Because sometimes I've worked with people that are great in terms of their performance, but they are making the team swirl, and that is not healthy for the team. And you need to like recognize that, interrupt it, and make a choice as a leader if that person belongs on your team or not. Are they doing more harm than good? And I will tell you, there's been a number of situations where I've seen organizations where I've recommended it or I've done it myself where I've removed that person and it made the productivity and the overall atmosphere of the entire team improve tenfold. And so
And that's a
those
hard
are
decision, by the way, Mara. That is not
really
an
hard.
easy, because they're usually long-term employees, at least in what I've seen. They're usually
Mhm.
long-term employees who are really competent at the tasks that they're getting done, but it is not a personality culture fit. And I think those are some of the hardest decisions. That
Mhm.
piece that you're talking about right there, well, we could have probably spent the whole podcast talking about
We
just
absolutely
that
can.
piece,
Yes.
right? Because that's a hard that is not easy, when someone is really good, but it's a personality fit,
Mhm.
and you've tried a lot of things, and at some point, it's like this you're losing a whole team because of one person.
And sometimes what I find now in my consulting practice, I'm the one that holds the mirror up to the leaders that I'm working with to say it. And they feel like, even though it's hard, I think they feel more validated in it. And we have a plan where we can work together and put it together. And okay, if we're going to do this, what does this look like? What are the implications for the team? How are we going to communicate this? How are we going to support the work in the back end? Right. So it's not just I'm going to take this hard action, but it's also thinking through what is the impact of this action going to be on the work, on the performance, on the team, on the culture, and how do I make sure I'm proactively putting a plan in place to manage all those things behind it. And you're right. Sometimes it's people that have been there a long time. I have had some situations too where it's people that I brought in when we're in a time of growth and the team is coming together. And maybe they just don't fit. So they've been there for a couple of years. They've made an impact on the function that they're doing, but they've served their time and purpose, and it's time to move on to the next thing. And so that might sound harsh, and I really don't throw people out. I'm really thoughtful about this process and about the way that you execute it, and it's very sensitive. And at the end of the day, I think every human deserves to be treated with integrity and respect, in whatever the tough processes are that we all face. But unfortunately, as leaders, there are times where we grapple with this and we have to ultimately decide what's best for the team and what's healthiest for the organization.
I agree with you, and I'll just say that I'm thinking of a couple of instances in my own career where I've had to have that hard conversation, and the way this has a lot to do with how you've built relationships and teams in the past, though, what your relationship is with that person. But for me, I've sometimes found with that individual that it's also time for them to go do something, and that they should be growing beyond what this job is as well, and, like, they need a push to go do a thing, like, because part of the reason they're acting in the way they're acting is, like, they're not happy and fulfilled in the place either, and that sometimes those conversations are hard, and I've had people yell and scream at me in those conversations to only come back several years later and say, "Really appreciate that you said those things to me," right? Like, it can be both. There is a yes and in there of, like, it's really hard, nobody likes it, and it's really the best thing not just for the company, but for that individual as well. Like, they need to go live up to their potential and do the things that fill them too, and sometimes you need someone to tell you, "I don't think this is for you."
I think it's a balance. I completely agree with you. And I think that I've had multiple situations on this topic that have gone in so many different directions, right? We all have. The other thing I would say though to leaders is I also don't want people to take it the opposite way, leaders to take it the opposite way and go with like, oh, I'm doing this person a favor and they're gonna appreciate it later on. So it doesn't matter how I do it. Like I see leaders who've done that, and like I just want to point that out. Like that is not okay. And treating people with dignity and respect in all parts of these conversations, whether it's lifting people up and engaging them and working towards a more productive team, or it's making a choice that maybe this no longer serves them or the organization, you can do it in ways that are empathetic, that are professional, that are supportive, and that don't tear people down to a point where they've now experienced workplace trauma. And so I want to say that as well.
Totally, totally agree. Have you been building trust and relationships and safety all along? Right. Have you been doing the things all along, I think, to get us there? Okay, we're coming to the end, Mara. Tell us, what's the latest book, podcast, television show that's caught your attention?
I just started my own podcast called In Her Land, and it is highlighting women's stories throughout the course of their lives and careers to hopefully empower other women, women in their 40s and 50s, getting to this place where they're exhausted by work, by life, by all the things, and they've kind of lost track of themselves in some of that. So right now, I am learning how to do a podcast, what words to use, what words not to use. And so that is taking up a lot of time and energy. In terms of other books, I'm like looking to the right over here because I have a book sitting here. I'm really focused on my own wellness. And so I was reading a book called Outlive and by Peter Attia, who's an MD, and thinking about how I want to live differently in the foods that I'm eating, the amount of sleep that I'm getting, um, not drinking alcohol. Like, I don't drink very much anyway, but being mindful of all of the things that I'm putting in my body and how my body works. And so I'm spending a lot of time thinking about those things right now.
We love it. Welcome to the wellness journey. It's a fun trip to be on. If you could have dinner with any historical or contemporary leader, who would you choose? But what's the one curious question you would want to ask them?
It would be Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the reason is I would want to ask her, now that she has passed away and she did not do a good job of putting somebody in succession to support all of the women's rights activities that she had worked so hard to achieve, how does that feel? Would you have made a different choice? Because I think this is a really important leadership lesson. As leaders, my goal has always been to leave a place better than when I got there and to have clear succession plans so people can pop right in and be effective. Now, if she had stepped aside a year, 2 years before she had become ill and put somebody in place to secure women's reproductive rights for the future, we'd be in a really different place right now. So that's who I would like to talk to. And I would like to have pushed her to make a different decision.
Yeah, she would also make an incredible guest on your podcast because it gets exactly to what you're talking about, right? Like all the pieces and all of the places. I love it. I think that succession plan is such a important piece. And maybe I'm saying this because I'm starting to get later into my own career and like it's not about building my career any longer. It's about like the handoff to the next, right? Which why I always say I love working with young leaders. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I love all the young people. I can't wait for them to take over. Let's have it happen now."
I think it's beautiful because you're giving back to the world. And I couldn't encourage, I encourage leaders to give back to the world contrary to where you are in your career, in your life. Like being in positions of power, we also have the ability to do good for others and to do good in the world. There are community initiatives that you can do that benefit the business and that benefit you. And there are ways you can impact people's lives for the rest of their lives and the jobs that you give them and the experiences that you give them.
Love that. Tell us lastly, what is the hobby or activity that just fills you with joy, for which you lose all track of time?
Gardening sponsored a women's retreat slash initiative for women that were graduating from the honors cohort program at the Ohio State University. We took a 2-day trip to New York. And one of the things I challenged them and I asked them is, what hobby do you have? And they are immersed in gardening and the outdoors. And so they really brought that to our lives. And now I have like a pumpkin patch. I have like every fruit and vegetable you could imagine growing in our backyard. And my friends have gotten to a point where they're like, Mara, we don't want any more eggplants. We're good on the zucchinis. Stop bringing them over. So I'm excited that it's April. My garage looks like the most insane greenhouse because we have everything growing. And it's something that brings me joy. It gives me energy. It's a way to decompress and disconnect. So I encourage everybody to figure out, number one, ask yourself, do I have a hobby? And number two, is it bringing me joy? Is it enabling me to disconnect? And how do I integrate it into my week?
It's my favorite question to ask because what we get stuck in that fight, flight, freeze. And the thing is it's the hobby, it's the life skill that rewires our brain. And I know so many people stuck in that trauma place, um, who say, I'm not good at anything, I don't have," and it's like, you are, and until we find it, it you can't rewire your brain to be creative, to be thoughtful, and so, to me, it's how do you integrate it, not just as your hobby, but how do you integrate it so it can be part of your everyday life? Now, gardening's a great one because it's like, well, your plants need taken care of every day, like, you can't neglect them for any chickens also, right? Chickens come up sometimes on the podcast as well, especially with the price of eggs, everyone has chickens now, and it's like, "Oh, I can't even go on vacation, I have chickens." Like, I can't leave the chickens, right? And so these pieces, but it's such an important way to rewire our brains, to disconnect, to find out who we really are, I think.
And you can redefine and discover what makes you happy at any point in your life. So gardening came to me 3 years ago through my children. And so try different things, experiment. And that feels maybe uncomfortable when you're older, but I can't recommend it more. Maybe it's working out and going for a walk. Like my husband and my one daughter are avid golfers. I'm never going to be as good as they are. It's just not how, no matter how many times I practice, and it doesn't bring me joy, but I still do it because I want to be included in their activities. So that's not really a hobby for me because it's not bringing me joy. It's just something I want to do to keep up with them. So try different things, experiment. Like it's okay to not know what hobby I love. And it's okay to drop things that you're like, this didn't serve me and I don't like it. So I encourage people to do that and
My
to
husband loves
evolve.
golf, but I do not bring clubs with me. I will walk along with you. I will tell you amazing shot, and I love walking on the course. It's beautiful. All the courses are so beautiful. I do not need clubs in my hand. Need clubs in
And
my hand.
knowing that about yourself is so important.
It is. Mara, can you tell our guests how can they find you? How can they learn more about you, the work that you do, the activities that you're involved in, if they would love to bring you in to help them go further in what they're
Absolutely.
doing?
Absolutely. So you can email me directly at Mara at onthemarkconsulting.com. The mark is spelled MRK. So you can email me directly at Mara, MARA, at onthemarkconsulting.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Mara, MARA, and my last name is spelled Kamat, KAMAT. You can also find me on the In Her Land podcast. And so you can just type in inherland.com and our podcast will pop up as well. And you'll see my whole bio and how to reach out. So I hope you'll reach out. I'm here, I do sort of HR consulting services, strategy services, even some coaching as it's come through. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast and to have this awesome conversation on a Tuesday morning.
I appreciate it. Mara, thanks so much for stopping by. I'm actually looking forward to go listen to the podcast myself. It sounds right up my alley. I can't wait to hear who you've had on. And we're appreciative that you've been on today, and hopefully you'll remain part of our community and come on again in the future.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mara. Thanks, everyone. And until next time, remember, slowly, slowly, we get there together. Thanks, everyone. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, CHEFALO, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening, and remember, change happens one step at a time.